Hey, what are you afraid of? What is stopping you from getting your first Sub 2? You afraid of the due on sale jail? You afraid the due on sale police or the lawyers that tell you this stuff is illegal or the real estate agents are going to turn you in? Listen, I've heard all the excuses, all the reasons, and there's just nothing to be afraid of. But I've got my buddy on here this morning, Bill Bronchick. He's an attorney, done thousands of these transactions. We're going to answer your questions about the fears of subject to and why you should be out there buying houses right now. So you guys grab your second cup of coffee or if it's lunchtime where you are, wherever you're at, get ready. You got 45 seconds to get your questions together, and we'll be back. Good morning, Sub2ers. Welcome to this edition of Goat Talk for April the 7th, 2022. Today we're in not so sunny Apollo Beach, Florida. Goat Talk is our weekly Facebook Live. Today we're talking about the fears associated with Sub2. We'll also answer your general real estate questions if you have any today. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We put out a lot of content every week. We answer questions for people, Ask the Goat segments. Our podcasts are there. You can check it all out at sub2deals.com/YouTube. Also, if you're getting started, you're on a budget, we have the best, least expensive, most affordable coaching program on the planet. Go to $7coaching.com. Share our live stream. Today, I'm going to give away something awesome. If I can get 10 of you to share our live stream, take a screenshot of this thing, share it on your wall, and we'll give away something by the end of the segment. So I'm going to bring my buddy in, Bill. He's waiting out here. Good morning.
Good morning, William. How are you?
Man, we're finer than frog hair. If we were any better, we wouldn't be able to stand ourselves, actually. So really excited to have you on here this morning. It's always great. Everybody loves to hear from an attorney on these things. Mm-hmm. Hey, Matt, good morning. Good to see you. Carlos is on here. Good morning. Andrew, our mortgage guy, we call him the postman. He always gives us the latest on the mortgage industry. Phil Smith, good morning to you from California. Tammy, good to see you. Our Florida buddies, we met down here a couple of weeks ago. You guys, if you have questions, bring those things in here and we'll pop those up here and get those answered. Bill, tell me, you've been doing this a really long time. I learned most of what I know from Bill Bronchick. He saved me from a life of drudgery and flipping burgers. If it wasn't for him, I'd probably still be doing that. Tell me, what do you see? What are the biggest fears that keep investors from just going out there and grabbing a deed from somebody?
Right. So thanks for having me on the show, William. It's always a pleasure. You got a great format here, and I loved your intro music. A lot of people don't know that I played the guitar on that riff, so...
Oh, yeah. That's why we use it.
So I think, there's the due on sale thing you mentioned.
Right.
I don't know if that scares a lot of people. It scares some, or it worries or concerns some. But I think the biggest thing is fear of people just asking for the deal from a seller and worried that the seller's going to think they're out of their darn mind. Mm-hmm. Because it may sound foreign. And I think the reason is because people over-explain it, as you know. They'll talk to a seller and say, well, I've got an idea. I'll take over your property subject to the existing loan, which means I'm not going to assume it, and I'm not going to pay it off. I'm going to keep making the payment. So don't worry about the due on sale, because that's not going to happen. We'll put it in a land trust, and that'll help. And the seller goes, what? So
right.
a confused mind says no. So
Right.
if they learn how to explain it in very basic terms, and of course we do disclose the risks to the seller and everything and all that at some point, but in the beginning discussion, just keeping it simple enough, just
Right.
hey, how about you just give me the property and I'll make your payments. That's easy, that, and most people get that, and very, very few sellers or anybody for that matter in real estate understands even what a due on sale is. So you should disclose it because it's a risk, albeit a very, very minor one.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest fear people have is the discussion, asking for the sale.
Right. We tell our students to be painfully honest. Now, you'll get some questions from sellers, but it's usually something like, when you finally get down to it, what happens if you don't pay? And I'm just bloody honest with them. I said, well, Mr. Seller, if I take over your payments and I don't make them, your credit's going to be trashed, to be quite honest with you. I'm responsible for doing it. I will do it. And of course, at this point in my investing, I can go back to many testimonials. I've been doing this for a really long time. I've got that to fall back on. When I didn't have that, I had letters from, referral letters from attorneys, anybody with letters after their name. That's a great thing.
Yeah.
That I could say, hey, this person will tell you I'm a great guy. I even carried around a copy of my credit report for a while because it was good. And I was able to say, look, Mr. Seller, I didn't give it to him, but I let him look at it. And I said, look, Mr. Seller, I've got a 780 credit score. I pay all my bills. I'm going to pay this one too. It's an investment for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I handle, a little differently. I mean, I sometimes I go to that. But most of the time first of all, most of the time when we're dealing with a seller who's willing to do a subject to,
right,
is someone who's planning on not making the payment anyway,
right,
or is already a payment or two behind, and is thinking, look, I'm just going to walk and let the bank have it. So the question doesn't come out that often, but if it does, I just look them straight in the eye and they say, well, how do I know you're going to make my payment? I look them straight in the eye and says, well, really, you don't. And then the first one who blinks loses. So just look them straight in the eye and be honest. Say the honest answer is you don't know if I'm going to make your payment, but at this point, do you have any other options?
Right. Yeah, and you're totally right. Most sellers aren't going to ask that, but you will run into it. That supports that belief that only the most desperate seller will do this. That's not true. I've dealt with a bunch of people with good credit, good jobs. The house was the headache for them.
Right. Yeah, I closed one for one of my clients here a couple of years ago, Joe, in Colorado Springs, who he took 3 houses worth almost $2 million from a chiropractor, who was a very smart, sophisticated businessman, but had a divorce, didn't want to deal with the rentals that he was renting all 3, and he just took them all subject to with no money, and the seller cut him a check for the security deposits at closing.
Yeah.
And he knew what he was doing, but and he was concerned, obviously, but obviously his motivation was greater than his concern. And I think if it's a matter of trust too. If you build rapport and trust with someone, then that question really doesn't come up as often. It's sort of like not in foreclosure, but in a situation where you're doing an owner carry with a seller, and the seller says, well, I want 30% down because I don't trust you. You're going to make the payments. I want you to have skin in the game. And the answer to that is you're not building enough rapport first with the seller. Because if he doesn't trust you, that's why he's asking.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Brad, good morning. Good to see you. Kevin Strong on here. Good to see you up in Washington. We've got Gabby here. Gabby, Raphael, Crystal, good morning. Good to see you. Gosh, we got Mark on here. Mark's a deal. Man, he's a machine. We got Ron Hugall here. Tracy, good to see you this morning. Guys, if you'll take a screenshot of our show, share it on your wall. Just let me know you did that. We trust you. Tell me you did it.
Take a shot. Let's smile.
All right. That's right. Take a screenshot, share it, share the YouTube link, if you will. Just let us know you did it. We trust you. We're on the honor system here. And like I said, if I can get a few people to do that, we'll give away something nice here at the end. We've got Tammy on here, it looks like, in the green room. Tammy's one of our Sub2 Max students. We give those guys the link to get in here and ask their questions directly. It's a little perk they get. So Tammy, you're in here. Are you here to ask a question?
Oh, well, I just thought most people came here, but actually, I do have a question.
Okay, what you got?
Yesterday, I was watching your, I don't know how old it is, with Gabby, what's her name? That she had her first Sub 2 she was thinking about buying. But
Okay, yeah, right. That's Gabby. She's in here today. She's
okay.
one of our Mac students.
Well, one thing that caught me, I mean, that there was many reasons I wouldn't have done that deal, but I don't know if she's doing it. But anyway, the one thing that struck me is you've said this before, but it really kind of bothers me now is that you said you never want to be in the position to go in front of a judge and say that I forgot the exact wording you said about basically you're stealing the person's property. How do you not worry about ever someone coming back and saying taking you to a judge and saying you know any
Well,
situation?
well, Tammy, I don't remember the exact context you're talking about. What I always say about finding myself in front of a judge, and when I tell you guys in several different scenarios, is if you make sure you're totally upfront with your sellers, if you make sure there are plenty of disclosures that explain in great detail exactly what's happening, and you do honest, ethical business, if you find yourself in front of a judge, you'll be able to say,
Okay.
Your Honor, we did everything above board, out in the open. You don't want to find yourself in a position where you've done something where you have to look bad. And
I
I'll give you an example of this, something that's been brought up here recently. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Let's say that you're talking to Joe Seller and he's in foreclosure and he can't make his payments. It's his home and he's just really distraught about it. He agrees to Sub2, you get it under contract, and 3 weeks later he calls you up and he says, Tammy, my aunt came through, she's given us the money to reinstate. We want to keep our home. We're going to be able to save it. And you go, oh no, we have a contract. You're out. Okay.
might just give it back to
And he says, but it's our home. We want to keep it. And you go, oh no, I'm going to go record a memorandum right now. And this guy, you don't want to do that. Things like that's come up again recently on Facebook. I saw something about it yesterday. You don't want to do that sort of thing because if this guy gets you in front of a judge, do you want to be that investor?
No.
Joe could save his house, but you did you have a valid contract? Absolutely you did. But you're dealing with somebody under pressure, in distress, and it's just not the right thing to do. And generally, if you do the right thing, you're okay in front of a judge.
Okay.
But if you're those type of situations, you don't want to do. And I don't remember exactly what Gabby's was, but I'm just talking about situations in general. Just make sure that you're squeaky clean and you get in front of that judge, you're going to be okay. That's what I'm trying to say. What do you think? I mean, you've been in front of probably a bunch more judges than I have, Bill. What do you think about it?
Yes. And doing it above board means close it at a title company or an attorney's office. Do formalities of a regular closing. If you meet with a seller, especially in foreclosure, and you say, here, sign this quit claim deed over the kitchen table and just record it. I mean, legally it's your house and legally you're right, but who needs that headache of going in front of a judge and say, well, this isn't the way it's, quote, normally done, because judges never heard of Sub2, most of them. So they're going to go from their experience of, well, I bought a house and we had a title search and an appraisal and an inspection and a realtor, and you're going over a kitchen table. Even though it's legal, judges have equitable powers, and that means to do what they think is fair. So there's the law and then there's equity. And you don't want them to make equitable arguments like, you said, stealing my house, patently unfair, overreaching. I even had someone argue they didn't have capacity, that they were, and they died, and the son's arguing he didn't have capacity, which is ridiculous. But nonetheless, it's an expensive lawsuit that involves the seller, the buyer, the title company, the broker, the mortgage company who lent on it after it was resold. So my client's out of pocket money on a transaction that was quite simple. So do it by the book. Do a regular purchase agreement, have an inspection, do a title search, do a closing, and then have good disclosures not only in your purchase contract, but I have sellers sign an additional affidavit at closing that spells it out again. like bang, bang, bang. I understand. I accept all these risks.
Right.
So you would never do a tabletop closing yourself then? I mean, well, you're an attorney, but
I used to. I mean, there were years ago when it was 3 days before the foreclosure sale when I get a kitchen table deed and then run and do it. Yeah, we used to do that, but a lot of states have foreclosure laws that don't allow you to do that anyway. You have rescission periods, and you're not supposed to do that type of practice. And certainly, if they're in foreclosure, getting a deed and then leasing it back to them with an option to repurchase it, that is ridiculously foolish.
Right.
It's prohibited by a lot of state laws now, but it's also patently unfair because if there's a lot of equity and they don't make payments on the rent after 3 months and you throw them out, that is what they call theft. Now, this whole idea of theft we were talking about before, you stole my house. Stealing is a legal term. It means taking without permission, or taking for no consideration and misrepresenting. There's different types of theft. If you have a contract that says the purchase price is $500, I'm taking subject to your loan of $450, and I'm giving you $10,000 for a total, and then a note for the rest. That spells out consideration. It's a $500,000 price. When you have a quitclaim deed that says for $10 and other consideration, it looks like you stole it, but you're not really, because you're taking over the debt that's on the property. So it's not for no consideration, but it looks bad.
I see.
Okay. That gets your question, Tammy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Oh,
not for me.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, you brought up an interesting point. I want to get some clarity here because I know we've got a lot of people in here. Okay, Gabby had an update. She said, we aren't doing it Sub2. We decided to go ahead and buy it for cash. We're glad we didn't do it Sub2. The lady has not moved yet. That would have been a big issue if we've done it Sub2. Absolutely. That's one of the things we talked about. This lady still occupies this property, and she doesn't want to move until after the closing. And I said, that's a big no-no. Let's don't do that.
Yeah, I'm very leery about doing like recording memorandums or fighting over a subject.
Right.
Like you said, 2 weeks later, they changed their mind. Well, this is an interesting variation. I have a client who agreed to a subject to and was dumb enough to give the seller $5,000 earnest money directly instead of to a title company. And then the seller turned around and sold it to someone else cash.
Right.
And now my client's flipping out. He's like, I want to sue them to enforce the contract. There was a memorandum I recorded and blah, blah, blah. I go, listen, it's a losing argument. Just sue in small claims for the $5,000 and be done with it.
Right. But you brought up something there about tabletop closings. Now, I got started doing some of that stuff. And still to this day, we'll do them. If we have trouble finding a title company or somebody to close it, we just do what we got to do. But again, you brought up an interesting thing there. If the seller being in foreclosure adds a whole other layer of potential problems. But if you're dealing with somebody that's not in distress, that just needs to move, they got a job transfer, they're whatever, and you can't find a title company or an attorney to close it for you, you're well within your rights to have a deed executed, go before a notary, your documents done. How do you feel about that? I mean, preferably, and this is what we tell our guys, if you can get a title company to do it, do it. You don't do a tabletop for saving money. You do it for convenience and speed if that's what you need.
If you have no other choice. And still, I would do a purchase agreement. I wouldn't just knock on the door, talk them into it, and here's a deed. You want to do it in stages. Like, let's sign a purchase agreement, and let's have a closing date, a week or two later after I've done all my due diligence. Exactly. And you can even prepare, you can download a HUD-1.
Exactly.
And fill it out. There's a line right on there that says taking loan subject to. It's right on the HUD. If you're not sure how to fill one out, then just go online to the ALTA, American Land Title Association website, and they give a whole video instruction on how to fill out a HUD-1. It's pretty simple for a subject to. But you should have sign something saying, I'm not a title company, I'm not an attorney, I don't represent you. That you're going to have responsibility on your own to report this as a sale, and you're not getting title insurance on this transaction. I'm not a title agency, I'm not saying you never do it that way, but what I described was, knocking on the door, talking them into it. Here's a quick claim deed for $10 and other consideration. In fact, there was a story. that the Denver Post did many years ago on foreclosure investors, painting them as vultures. And they had a copy of a deed that they pulled from public record and the guy's name individually as the buyer and said, look, he paid nothing, $10 for the house. And it was stupid and ignorant, but it made him look really bad. And he was furious about the bad press. And I said, well, if you'd done it in a land trust, probably they wouldn't be able to know your name.
That's right.
At the very least. But he had the seller quit claim it to his own name. And then they put that deed in the paper and said, look, he only paid $10 for an X $1,000 house.
I don't know that I've ever seen a deed that didn't have $10 and other good and valuable consideration on it.
Well, in some states, the county makes you put the actual consideration on a warranty deed. So they know what to tax you on, because a lot of states have transfer tax based on the value of the transfer. Quit claim deed is you're giving up ownership of a claim to the property. And by the way, folks, it's not quick claim deed. Like it's quicker than a warranty deed, and it's not. It's the same piece of paper, signature notary. It's quit. I give up I quit any claim. So it can be used to transfer ownership. It could be used to say, I don't own any interest in this property anymore. It could be used to put it in a trust. It could be used in a divorce. It could be used just because you recorded a memorandum and the title company wants you to sign a quit claim deed to give up your interest in the property.
Right. So, and so you just backed up what I've been telling these guys. If you have to do a tabletop, and that's what we call it, obviously it's not done on the kitchen table. Well, maybe in the past they did that stuff, but every document that you use in a regular closing, you want to do that right down to the HUD. So make sure.
Do it in your office. I mean, in a kitchen table, reeks of you went in their house and strung arm.
Right.
Even if you don't have a physical office, you can go and Google this. There are offices you can rent by the day or by the hour without even being a member of it. You just pay like $50 and they'll tell you, show up at this office at this place, and you show up and they give you a conference table room, and it's great because it gives credibility and makes it look like it's more in the up and up.
Right. Hey, Cindy, good morning. Good to see you. Farouk's here. Tammy says she shared the broadcast. Thanks. We appreciate that. Miguel's here. Adam. Let's see. We've got something from Andrew. This is a controversial notion, but I feel many are scared to be successful. Others still have been conditioned to believe success or money is somehow unethical, dirty, or wrong. I sent out an email yesterday and I asked, just in preparation for this, what are your biggest fears? What's stopping you from doing your first deal? And it was amazing. I expected some technical things. I expected the due on sale and some other stuff we haven't gotten to yet, but probably half or more was exactly what Andrew's talking about. It's mindset. I don't feel like I deserve to be successful, or I feel like I'm taking advantage of other people. Right. And buying these houses is unethical. Making all this money from nothing is unethical. What do you think about that?
Well, I have two comments. One is, the thing about that success or money is unethical because, they've probably been told that in church that Jesus said it's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go to heaven. Everybody misreads that story. The precursor to the story was there was a crowd of people and some guy came up to him and said, I'd love to follow you, but I'm rich and I got all these businesses and assets and things to worry about. And Jesus said to him, lay that down and just come with me. And he says, well, I kind of wish I could, but I really can't. He was too afraid to do it.
Right.
And that's when Jesus said, look, it's easier to get through the camel through the eye of a needle. Well, he wasn't saying that being rich was evil or doesn't get you to heaven. What he was saying is if you're attached to it so much that you can't let it go, you'll never get to heaven. And that's the mistake. That's what we were drilled in as little kids, well, I'm Jewish. We weren't. We're all about money. But Catholic kids, we're brainwashed with that. But as far as the people are afraid to be successful, you're right. Because, they're going to have to give up their broke, complaining, whining, excuse-making friends and sometimes relatives. It's, I tell people that they're afraid to make an offer because they're afraid they might not get a good response. I think most people are afraid to make an offer because the seller might say, okay. And they go, holy crap, what do I do now?
Exactly.
That scares me more.
And that's proven, over and over again. We travel a bunch, and one of my hobbies is to call bandit signs. And without fail, 99% will not answer the phone. And even if you leave a message, they won't call you back. It's amazing. And we had a student that this happened. I'll never forget this because it was just so sad, really. He posted a picture of a shirt that said "We Buy Houses." He says, "I've had this for a couple of years and I'm afraid to wear it because I don't know what to say if somebody says, 'Do you buy houses?' I need to sell one." And I mean, that they're just afraid. And really, it starts with a conversation.
Right.
What do they need, really? And then how can we work together to solve the problem? You don't have to be an expert. How many times have you had a seller tell you, "Listen, if you'll just take this thing, I don't even want it." Well, there's your opening right there. You don't have to pitch anything.
Right.
Okay. Well, if we could
I've asked sellers that, I'm like, "What do you think we should do?" And they said, "Well, how about I give you the property and you make the payments?" And it's not always,
Right.
but most of the time, if you find the right person, look, most sellers are not motivated, especially in today's market where it's a seller's market. They want to sell their house. They want to get the most cash out of it. They want to get all their equity, every dime squeezed out of it so they can buy another house. Those people are not motivated. You can't talk someone into this. They have to be inclined to already be into it. You got to catch someone on the fence, and then you could just push them over, with a little bit of education, information, and a little persuasion. But you can't pick someone up, and throw them over the fence.
Right. For sure.
That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah. Andrew had another question. Or is that you? Is that my producer here? She's okay. He said, "Does recording calls and or contract signings above and beyond paperwork afford us any additional protections or power if we do have to ever account for the purchase in front of a judge?"
Yeah. It's interesting. I used to record a lot of my closings that way. Audio record them with a little tape recorder, the old tapes, and then digital. First of all, you have to know if you get their permission, it's fine. In most states, they're called one-party states, so you can record, just with a hidden camera, and you don't need the permission. Obviously, places like California, you need both parties' consent. But for you, I used to say, "Listen, this is for everybody's benefit, and if you want a copy, just let me know," and just put a recording on there. So I did that for years, and then someone said to me, "That's kind of a bad idea because they'll twist what you said because you won't say it the same way every time when you explain it. Instead, make a pre-recorded video that they have to go online, watch, and say, 'I watched it.' That way you could say to the judge, 'Look, this is the standard thing I explained to everybody.'" And I said, "That's a really good idea. I like that.
Right.
I like that idea." It's like when you go, before you file bankruptcy, now you have to go through a little course online and say, "Yeah, I watched these videos and did these, Q&A." So that's not a bad idea. To have someone, give them a pre-recorded link and then have them sign something or online click, "Yes, I acknowledge that I watched this and I understand it." That way you just present the one video to the judge, and there's no straying from it.
Right. Yeah. That's an excellent idea. Yeah. You just explain it in detail again. They sign an acknowledgement that says they watched it, and then you've got that. Yeah. That's great. That's a good tip today. Okay, let's see. Mark says, "Yes, always do the right thing." Absolutely. Vincent, good morning, everyone. So awesome to have Bill Bronchick here.
Bronchick, like brown chicken without the W.
All right, let's see.
It's a funny story, quick one. When I was speaking at Get Motivated once, they had a running Twitter feed on the screens, and someone said, "Bill Belichick looks much younger in person."
Belichick.
Like, no, I'm not the coach.
Listen, I know what you're talking about with that name thing. I get called all kind of stuff. William Tangle. The other day I got an email, William Dingle, all different types. I know exactly what you mean there. Let's see. Mark said he shared it, shared our live stream. Great. We appreciate that. We just need a few more. Get that freebie today. Vincent, when doing a lease to own, does the payments the renter make go toward the purchase price, lowering what is owed? That's equitable interest, isn't it?
It can be, depending on how much it is, or you could say that, because the way I do it, I don't use the word credit. I say for every payment you make on time, X percent will reduce the purchase price, the option price.
Right.
Or you could say X, that's preferred to then saying X amount goes towards your down payment, because that sounds more like,
right.
They've got something there. You're saying, as consideration for paying on time, I will reduce the purchase price for every payment you make on time, $200 for every payment you make on time.
Right.
Okay.
I don't do lease options anymore, but I've heard, I keep up with what they're talking about. And what do you think about, instead of it going toward the purchase price, it goes toward closing cost, your participation toward closing cost? You think that would make a difference?
That's actually not a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Because then it's conditioned upon closing.
Right.
That's right. That's an excellent, that's a really good idea. I think I'm going to edit my form.
Oh, there you go. Tammy asks, how does William explain to the seller the due on sale clause?
Okay. More importantly is when. When we sign the contract, I go over it, clause by clause, and nobody ever has a beef with that. I've done a lot of closings that involved a wrap or a subject to, both for myself and for hundreds of clients. And not one person said, wow, I don't know about this. They all were like, yeah, it's some big bank around the country, and they probably won't do anything. And yeah, I understand.
Okay. All right. If you guys have questions, let us have those. Just moving on. Now, we were talking about the due on sale clause earlier and why so many people, so many investors are afraid of it. That's the first thing that comes up. What about that? What happens? What happens if the due on? I mean, first of all, you've done a ton of these. I've done several hundred of them. Yeah. For my podcast over a year ago, I said, guys, we're all afraid of the due on sale clause. Fine. Give me an example where don't tell me it was your cousin's friend's best friend. If you have personal experience with it, let me know. And I got 3 or 4 responses, but it was all hearsay. I got one guy that contacted me and said he had an issue. I had him on the show. Predictably, it was a small local bank that kept up with that stuff, and they raised the due on sale issue. Yeah. What's your experience with that?
I've probably done 1,500 closings or more in the last 30 years involving these transactions. Only twice did I see a bank make a stink, and they were unique circumstances. I had a seller who did a quick claim deed over a kitchen table, blah, blah, blah. And then 5 years later, the seller called them up and said, hey, this is still in my credit report. I want to get a new house. I thought you were going to pay this off. And my client correctly said, I never promised you that. And the seller says, well, I want you to pay it off. And my client says, well, too bad. So the seller calls his bank. It was Norwest, which was, I think, now Wells Fargo. And called them up and says, look what happened. He won't pay it off. What are you going to do about it? So they wrote a letter to my client saying, we got you and you got 30 days to pay it off. So he comes to me and says, what do I do? I said, first of all, idiot, don't do a deed across a kitchen table. Where's your disclosures? You're a realtor. You know better than this. And you don't, when someone's pissed off, you don't tell them to go to hell. That's not how you handle it. Right. Especially in a situation like this. I bet you if you gave him a little money, he would have shut up. Or signed something saying I'm okay with it and I won't bother you anymore. But you did the wrong thing, and now you got to pay the piper, which means you got to either refinance it and pay off that loan, or sell the property and pay off the loan. Which one do you want to do? He goes, well, I'll think about it, but I can't do it in 30 days. I said, of course not. I said, the foreclosure process is 4 months in Colorado. So I tell you what, I said, why don't I write a letter to the bank and ask them for more time? So I wrote a letter and I said, dear bank, we got your letter. And yeah, you're right. But 30 days is unreasonable. I mean, we have 6 months, please. And he'll sell or refinance it. We don't hear anything. So I said, go and do what you got to do. So he sells the property, pays off the loan. And then 6 months later, we get a letter back from Norwest going, no, we won't give you an extension.
6 months later?
6 months later. That was a unique set of circumstances. And other times, I just recently had a client with a small bank in Wyoming, same kind of thing, where they're raising the issue. And I said, well, you have 2 choices. 3 choices. You could A, assume it. B, sell it, or C, refinance it. Or actually, the fourth option is just call their bluff. Say, I dare you. Go ahead and call in a performing loan on a property with little or no equity. Go ahead. And I don't remember what he did. I think he just he refinanced it.
Right.
He was too chicken. I said, what are you chicken about? Well, if they start the foreclosure, then it takes months for them to finish it. It's not your credit they're foreclosing on.
Right.
And it doesn't affect the seller's credit for a foreclosure for a due on sale. It's because it's not a non-payment.
Right. Right. And that's what I try to tell everybody. So if you do get the due on sale letter, I'd love to see one. I've never seen one. You get the due on sale letter, then what? You have options. All is not lost. You don't have to throw your hands up and walk away. You can choose to ignore it until you get a second letter. And I've had people tell me that if you get a letter, and you ignore it, chances are you may not even hear from them again. You're saying you responded and didn't hear anything for 6 months.
Yeah.
In your case,
by the way, you could deed it back to the seller.
Right.
That solves the breach of the mortgage agreement.
You could deed it back to the seller, buy it on a wrap.
Right.
If you wanted to, you could negotiate with the bank. Say, well, I'll assume the loan. Go assume it. Refinance it. I mean, there are a lot of options before walking away.
Right. So the last thing I do would walk away. I would try to give it back to the seller.
Right.
Exactly. And I had a situation like that. Interestingly, I had a situation where I had a client buy a couple of properties subject to 2 condos. He gave the seller like $5,000 subject to the loans. And he told me all about it. And I said, great, good deal. So like 4 years later, he calls me up and says, I'm moving to Florida. Would you like these 2? And I said, well, what do you want? I said, he goes, well, just give me the $5,000 and they're yours. I said, okay, fine. So I did it and I rented them out. And 3 or 4 years later, this was around 2005. And what was happening was everybody who had a pulse could get a loan. So nobody wanted to rent. So vacancy went up to 15% in Denver. So my rents dropped. And then it had a problem with the HOA. And then the HOA fees went up. Then it had a leak problem and a mold. It was getting to be a problem. These were losers. So I called up the seller and said, you don't know me, but you know Mitch. And you sold it to Mitch and Mitch sold it to me. And I never promised you anything, but I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to give them back to you. And he said, I don't want them. I said, well, you don't understand. I am not paying them. I never promised you anything, so I have no obligation to pay these. And Mitch, well, you could chase after him, but whatever. I'm doing the right thing. I'm giving them back to you because you don't understand. I don't want them. He thought like having the deed in his name was like a social disease. And so, I wrote him a letter, outlining all the bad things that'll happen if he doesn't take it. And he ignored me. So first I went to the bank and said, I stopped making payments. 3 or 4 months later, I called them up and said, you want to do a short sale? They wouldn't do it. And so I just let it go. And, there's nothing else I could do.
Right.
I never promised to make the payments because I didn't deal with the seller originally.
Right.
And he refused to take them back. So after that, I wrote a clause in my contract saying anytime I want to as the buyer and I don't like this deal anymore, I could quit claim it back and record it. And you can't say anything about
it. All right.
Because if I want to deed it, the part of the transfer is acceptance of it. So if I give him a deed and he throws it out, I'm screwed.
Right.
So I put a clause saying I could record a quit claim deed, and then as soon as I do that, you waive any liability against me.
Right. And that's in your sales agreement. So when they sign the contract to sell to you, they already know you have the option to give it back anytime you want to. Okay. That's good. Yeah. All right. So Brad says, I've come to the conclusion knowing a good lawyer that knows creative finance is more than key because it will take some time to know all the paperwork that goes with this. Well, obviously, if you can find somebody, that seems to be a little bit more difficult than even when I got started. Because a lot of people, title companies, especially, they're like, oh, we can't do this with an FHA. I had one of my students tell me the other day, their attorney said that they had approached, said, well, we can close it, but we're going to have to send notification to the bank that the title's changed. Why?
So?
Yeah.
So they won't do anything.
Yeah. So, I knew a guy once that said part of his process with buying them was sending official notification to the bank. We've taken over these loan payments.
Right.
Here you go. That put them on notice. And if they tried to come back later and say there's a problem, they could use that to say, listen, you guys have known about this for 2 years.
That's not a terrible idea because it's the concept is called in law is called latches. It's an equitable defense. And so they start foreclosure, and you go, well, latches means use it or lose it. So they have a right in the mortgage or deed of trust to accelerate the loan if they choose. It's not due on sale is actually a bad expression. It's not due on sale automatically. It's due on sale if the lender wants to.
Well, it actually says that. Those actual words are in that, at their option.
Right. The lender may at their option call all sums due and payable. So it's public knowledge. The deed has been transferred. You did a change of insurance. They got notice of it constructively.
Right.
But you can go one step further and say they had actual notice because I sent them a deed. They did nothing. And now 6 years later, when interest rates are 14%, now they want it judged. And they waived it. And I think that's a very good argument. But, there's a risk they send a deed and they go, wait, what did you do here? I think 9 out of 10 lenders wouldn't blink an eye if you sent them a copy of a deed with a letter.
Right. What do you think about just the fact that they've accepted payment from a different party now for X number of months or years? I mean, is that not an argument that you guys?
It was when you used to send checks, but now, as we know, we do it online. Right. And there's an auto draft out of my LLC's bank account directly to his lender. So I don't think they see what bank account it comes from. Maybe they do. Right. I don't know.
Okay. So it sounds to me like, there are several arguments you could make if you just wanted to fight it. If you didn't have the means to refinance or the ability to pay it off with cash, then you could, I guess, fight it. If that, I don't know how expensive that would be, but it would be up to them to file the lawsuit and sue you.
Right. Probably not worth it because unless there's a lot of equity, it's not worth the fight.
Right.
But if you sold it on a wrap and now you've got someone else involved, then you may have to fight it a little bit. I had one other situation on one of my own properties where I changed insurance companies, and I had put a property in a land trust. It was one of my own. And 6 or 7 years later, I changed insurance companies. They got the notice. This is Flagstar Bank, and I know at least 3 other people who have the same problem with Flagstar. Flagstar Bank wrote a letter saying due on sale. And I called them up and go, what are you doing? This was 6 years ago I transferred it. And they go, and I said, besides, it's an exemption. You could put it in a trust under the law. And they said, no, that only applies to personal residences because it says the transfer to a living trust of which the borrower is and remains a beneficiary and does not relate to a change in occupancy. Okay. So, taking from a seller and changing occupancy, that technically does trigger it. Now, what they didn't know is my LLC was the beneficiary, not me, but I didn't get to that yet. I said, well, this applies. And they said, well, it doesn't. It doesn't apply to rental only applies to owner-occ, not rental properties. I'm like, I think you're reading this wrong. And I said, I'm willing to fight you on it. And then finally they just said like, well, who did you sell it to? I go, I didn't sell it to anybody. I said, I'm under the trust. And they went, oh, we thought you just sold it to someone else. Okay, no problem.
They didn't ask for any proof of that or anything.
No, because I didn't want to show them the trust agreement that my LLC is the beneficiary. And start arguing about that.
Yeah. Hey, Sarah, good to see you. Luke's got a question, land trust question. Should we ever keep multiple properties in one land trust? Also, is the Form 56 required to be filed with the IRS every time we sell the property in a trust and terminate the land trust?
No, there's an old IRS reg that says you're supposed to file Form 56 to let them know the trust exists, but there's no penalty for it. So I just don't file it.
Right.
Plus, I have a provision in my land trust agreement that says this is not a trust within the meaning of, and I quote the reg that requires Form 56.
Right.
But that's one of those. It's like you're technically supposed to, when you sell to someone on an owner carry, give them a Form 1098 every year. Most people don't do it, but it's rarely regulated, and the penalty is minor. You're supposed to, for every person you pay interest, if you pay interest to a seller on an owner carry, you're supposed to give them a Form 1099 INT. Nobody does that either. So I wouldn't worry about the Form 56.
Right. Okay. The second biggest fear from the responses I got was, what happens if I get sued? And, my answer to someone that has an issue with being sued, if you do this for any length of time, somebody's going to sue you. I mean,
you do any kind of business that involves customers and public and employees. Yeah. Eventually, you're going to get sued. That's just part of the world we live in. So, the odds are thin, but it does happen. The best thing you can do is just make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's and tell the truth. And even with all that, you'll still get sued.
Right.
Someone will come back later and argue. I had a situation where someone did a subject to with my client and through a trust assignment. And 15 years later, the guy's wife, who had divorced him 2 years later, said, you hid that asset from the bankruptcy. I mean, from the divorce. And they were trying to stop my client from reselling it with a lis pendens. And this lawyer was a complete idiot. And I had to explain it to him about 10 times before he understood that the seller assigned his beneficial interest, which means he didn't have anything to disclose anymore. He didn't own anything. So the wife has no claim to this property. And finally, we resolved it and they let it go. But there was a fight.
Yeah. I've never been sued by a seller. I've never been sued by a buyer. I have been sued numerous times by tenant buyers. And it's one reason I don't do lease options anymore. That whole expectation that they're going to take care of all the maintenance and everything else. And you get in front of a judge, and I've seen it go both ways personally. One, when you say, because you show up with your lawyer, to me, you lawyer up. I mean, you hire somebody to represent you in court when you're sued by a tenant. And when he's standing there and he's going, Mrs. Smith, is this where you sign saying you understand these are your responsibilities? Yes, but, did you sign here? It's disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. And you'll get in front of one judge that'll say, Mrs. Smith, I think you knew what you were doing. And then you'll get some that just follow the law and say, what are you doing? You own this house. She don't. You should be fixing stuff.
Right. The warranty of habitability requires a landlord to fix all things that relate to habitability, like running water, electric, and all that. I used to do in the beginning, it's like the tenant's responsible for everything. And, knock on wood, I never got in front of a judge on that. But I changed my tune on that one to say, minor repairs, let them fix broken screens and, a clogged toilet or, things like that. But if the furnace goes, they're going to side with the tenant and say there's a warranty that the landlord has of habitability to fix those things under the law. Right.
You've got to, you can expect to maintain the property. Now you can do it with their option consideration. That's non-refundable. So and that's sort of the way I looked at lease options after a while. If they exercised, great. If they didn't, I could use their option money to get the house ready for the next person.
Right.
But I think that's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah. I think, there was a rent to own program that one of the cities did somewhere. I think it was Milwaukee or something. And their success rate was like 22%. And that's about right. My success rate was better than that for my tenant buyers. Because when I pick tenant buyers, I pick them as if they have a reasonable chance of actually succeeding. Now, whether they succeed or not is often up to them. But what I found is if there's a lot of equity and I want my money out, if I push them, they're more likely to succeed. So if I call them and say, what are you doing? Have you met with my mortgage broker? Have you fixed that credit problem? Have you gotten this issue resolved, with your child support that you have to fix, and if you push them, then they do tend to succeed at a much higher rate. But if you just say, good luck, it's low.
Yeah. I'd agree with those numbers. I found it to be about 80 not buying, 20 buying. But again, I didn't push people then. When we changed things and went to total seller finance and actually hooked them up with a mortgage broker and credit repair, now it's reversed. It's 85% actually refinance and 10 or 15 don't. So it's a lot less hassle. You get more money up front. I prefer seller financing.
It all depends on the market too. In today's market where things are going up and up and up, and your option price is below market, the chances of them of exercising that option go way up.
Right.
But if it's you sell it for 110 cents on the dollar, and the market's 110, if it's like even Steven, then the chances are much lower.
Right. Jody said, I was told if you haven't been sued, you're not really successful. That's right. You're not doing enough.
What was Trump sued? Was sued like 3,800 times in his career. And you know, it's the interesting thing that everyone likes to use that to say, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a Trump lover, but I was reading an article about that. They said he was sued like 3,800 times. And everyone uses it to say what a bad guy he is. But what they didn't say is like 85% of them, he just won or settled. So he only lost like 15% of the time.
Right.
So that's pretty good odds.
Yeah, that's right. Troy says, how do you handle sellers who file bankruptcy? I can tell you in my experience with that, after the sale, once we've taken it, every time we get a call from their attorney, what happened, we explained it, and they went away. We never had any trouble.
Yeah, I never had a problem with post sale bankruptcy. Now, if it's in bankruptcy, you know, there's some hoops to jump through here. Especially if it's a Chapter 7, you need the trustee in bankruptcy's permission to allow the transfer, because once someone files bankruptcy, all their assets belong to the bankruptcy estate. It's sort of like when someone dies, everything belongs to the estate.
Right.
So there's a person in charge of that estate, and that has to give permission. And what I've found is if there's little or no equity,
right,
and you're just taking over payments, and they're already behind anyway, they're okay with it. They're okay with it.
Right. Okay. And to answer Luke's questions, I think Farouk did answer it down here. I recommend, and I know you do too, one property per trust.
Right.
That's what we do.
The only exception, you know, I've had clients who own three lots that were worth 15 grand each. Could we put all 3 lots in one trust? Yeah, that's okay. Right. But a single family house, yes, one property per trust.
Right. Brad said, can a land trust be created online? If so, what are some key things to be sure it is created correctly?
It needs to be printed, signed, and acknowledged before a notary. So the answer is no. I mean, you can create the document online if someone has a portal to do so. But you ultimately have to make sure, A, it's well drafted, B, it's filled out correctly, C, it is signed and acknowledged before a notary.
Okay. Let's see. Geraldo, hey, good to see you, man. I hadn't seen you around much lately. I have some loans at less than 3%. If rates keep going up, are you guys worried these low rate loans would be called? I don't have a big worry of that, because, I mean, just the effort going in to do it, it would have to go up pretty significantly to make it financially worthwhile for the bank.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I was waiting for this question because it's a great question, by the way. So interest rates, you know, you got one at 3, and interest rates now are floating for owner-occ are floating in the high 4s, low 5s, depending on your type of loan and how good your credit is. I don't think that's enough for them to make us think. And if you took that loan subject to multiple years ago, and then it goes up, let's say in 2025, it goes up to 9, and then they call it, you have that latches argument. You could say, hey, you know, you've known about this for years. Use it or lose it. And you're being greedy now, and judges don't like greedy. I mean, you're the little guy against the big greedy bank. And it's not like they could say, well, you signed these things with the bank. No, I didn't. I didn't sign anything with the bank. The seller did.
Okay. All right, guys, we want to get a few more people to share this. If you do share it, take a screenshot or just share the YouTube link and let us know over here in the comments that you did that, so we can give you that freebie. It's a good one today. Mark said, have you ever had any issues when the borrower or seller dies?
Good. Now, nobody's liable for the loan. Yeah, I've had sellers die. Just keep making the payment, and they keep taking it. Right. Here's, by the way, speaking of which, don't take subject to on a reverse mortgage for the loan. Because it's due when they move out, not just when they die, when they move out, whichever comes first. So if grandma goes to a nursing home and you want to take that subject to, you could do it and then flip it, because it takes them a while to process that. But if you want to take subject to and keep it as a rental, not gonna work.
But and those guys check on that stuff, because they'll send a property inspector by to verify occupancy. Yeah,
I've heard that there's like, I think it's due within a year of. I haven't really looked at this that much detail, because they're FHA loans and they're reverse amortizing. So, you know, even if there's any equity, it's going to be eaten up as I don't make payments. So I've never actually taken one subject to, But if your plan was, if let's say there was equity, they just pulled the loan out, because when you start the loan with a reverse, it's like a 55, 60% LTV. So grandma dies, and then you take subject to, give a little cash to the estate or to the heir, and then fix it up and flip it. That's fine. That's okay. I would do that.
Okay. Luke said, kind of torn whether land trust is worth it since we sell land so fast nowadays, less than 6 weeks of ownership for vacant land. Is the extra paperwork worth it with the trustee, beneficiary interest, plus how dumb closing attorneys are? Personally, I would rather have my name out there as little as possible, ever. And if you've got liens or judgments from anything, and that property goes into your name for 2 seconds, it's attached. Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct. I just don't like leaving a trail on public record for people to follow. Right. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, you can create a land trust in seconds. I mean, print it out, fill it out, sign it, notarize it, whatever. It depends also if you're selling the land for cash. If you're flipping it for cash, maybe an LLC is fine. But then again, if you flip 70 properties, there's a trail of pattern of activity that anybody can look up. If everything's in a separate land trust, you can't cross-reference. That's what Disney did, by the way. Mm-hmm. Disney bought farmland in Orlando under land trusts. He sent people down under separate trusts with separate trustees and quietly bought up farmland cheaply in the middle of swampland in Florida. If he had put an ad in the Orlando Sentinel that said Disney's buying land, come down to the Hilton and bring your deed, he would have paid top dollar. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of reasons, to use the land trust. If you're going to carry payments, yeah, I would.
Okay. Andrew said the notion that banks will call loans due to higher rates. If the bank takes that gamble and then is forced to foreclose, they have to lock up a multiple of the outstanding balance, which they can no longer lend out.
True.
And how do they, across the board, just the thought of them just mass for calling loans due seems nuts.
Yeah, it does seem kind of nuts because, as Andrew points out correctly, as default rates of loans go up, banks are required to have more reserves by the Fed. Now, the amount of loans that we're taking subject to in this forum is probably not enough to really dent that. But if they were going to start calling loans that people put in LLCs and people put in trusts and people put in, family limited partnerships, and all those are all technically, violations of due on sale. If you buy a property in your own name with a conventional loan and then transfer it to an LLC, that does trigger the due on sale, but they just don't look at it as really they care because it's the same party in interest, even though technically it does trigger it. So that would make a big dent. There's millions of properties that people bought as investments and then put them into an LLC and then would theoretically trigger a due on sale if the lender wanted to make a stink.
Rates going up, that's going to affect other things as well. How many people can even buy a house, and then you've got the issue with people now that are getting into financial trouble. Before they do, they refinance to lower their payments to save them. That won't be an option at that point. So you've already got this increase in defaults and foreclosures, and now they're just going to mass call loans due that are current and being paid. And don't federally backed loans, FHA, some others, have to get approval for the foreclosure process before the bank can even do it? Are they going to approve a foreclosure on a performing note just because?
I wouldn't think so, but we're talking about the federal government here.
That's true.
Not exactly a bastion of intelligence and good sense. So, and again, that's a small number. Most of these loans that I've taken over are conventionals. Mm-hmm. I've done a few FHAs and VAs, but I'm taking a wait and see attitude with this. Yeah. What bank wants to be the first one to make a precedent a bad precedent in court, right?
Right.
Because this hasn't been litigated since the early 80s. In the early 80s and late 70s, when the due on sale first came into being, interest rates were extremely high.
Yeah.
So banks were losing money, but the money supply that we're printing now, there's plenty of money to go around for banks to lend. Back then, the money supply was tighter. And these banks, which were much smaller back then, a lot of savings and loans and smaller banks who made decisions on their own loans that they serviced. Now you've got conglomerates who have servicing to a third party, and the servicer has to call the lender to get permission. I think we'd see less of it. It's possible we'd see it, but real estate is full of risks. You can have a broken hot water heater that could flood things. You can have a fire. You can have a roof that needs fixing. You can have a drive-by shooting, a meth. These are all things that happen to me. A door kicked in by an ex-boyfriend violating a restraining order, and you got to replace the whole frame. I mean, all kinds of things happen in real estate when you own it. And so there are lots of risks. And I think on the scale of things, a loan being called is so far towards the bottom of that what I'm worried about. And it's risk reward. I mean, if this doesn't appeal to you, we'll go put 20% down, sign your own name on an 80% loan to value loan, pay all kinds of costs and fees, and be on the hook for 30 years. Go ahead. It's your choice.
And that's really, I think, what the point of this is here today. Most of the things people are worried about that keep them from getting started, what you'll learn once you do get going are things that just don't deserve much of your time.
Just rarely happen. I mean, I said, I've done over 1,500 of these, and I've only seen maybe 2 or 3 cases of a bank even inquiring. So that's pretty good odds. The odds of a meth lab are much higher.
Right. A meth lab or a tenant that doesn't pay you and won't move and you have to cover the mortgage.
Right.
I mean, these are real issues.
Those are real issues
that happen.
All kinds of issues that happen, that happen every day of the week that are risks of owning property. And you could use this as a short-term strategy. If there's equity and you get a good deal on the equity, take subject to for a year and then go to a bank and refinance at 80% loan to value. You can do that, especially on a primary residence. If you go in on a primary for your own, that's how I bought my first primary, was a subject to, and it was 7.25%. It wasn't a good loan, but it cost me $3,500 and it was all in good shape except for that turquoise carpet. It was really ugly. I felt bad taking it out because the seller was really into this, Santa Fe look, with pink and turquoise everywhere. So I painted over the pink, but the brand new Stainmaster $30 a yard turquoise carpet, it was awful. So I changed that out, and other than that, painting over the pink, it was fine.
Yep. Hey, Bill, thanks so much for being here today. We've got a few more questions, but we're running over the hour now, and I want to make sure you can get back to, I know you're busy and you got stuff going on. We appreciate you sharing time with us today. We had a few people share. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys this. This should have been a product. It's a creative financing guide. You can go to sub2deals.com/CFG and get it. It's about 30 pages. It goes pretty in depth in subject to wraparound mortgages, seller financing, even lease options for those of you folks that like to do lease options. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. And also gives you a strategy to introduce. A lot of your comments on the email said, I don't know how to talk to sellers about it. And listen, we've taken to the approach of just going in like everybody else that's calling them. Well, okay, you want 200. What if we pay you 120? Oh, no. Well, we may have a way we can give you full price. Would you like to hear about that? Okay. And here we go into a seller finance scenario. So that's in there as well. You guys go download it, take a look at it. Let me know what you think about it. So again, Bill, thanks so much for being here today.
Pleasure. Thank you, William. Thank you, everybody else, for joining and your great questions. I really do.
Thanks. Okay, guys, that is it for this episode of Goat Talk. We appreciate the heck out of you joining us, asking your questions, and we'd appreciate it if you'd share this. Again, Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We put out a lot of content over there every week, not just Goat Talk. Our podcasts are there, our Ask the Goat segments. We're going to roll out some new stuff here in the next week or so, but I'll surprise you with that. So y'all go over there and subscribe, and y'all can keep up with everything that's going on. So until next week, get out there, talk to some sellers, and buy some houses. We'll see y'all next week.